Some people walk into a room and everything shifts. Not because they're loud. Not because they demand attention. But because they have something you can't fake. Presence. What if respect isn't about being the smartest or the loudest? What if it's about something quieter? What if the people who command respect aren't trying to command anything at all? Because real authority doesn't announce itself. It doesn't perform. It just is. And people feel it without knowing why. Welcome to Unfiltered Adulthood, where we explore the quiet psychological shifts that reshape you in your 20s, 30s, and 40s. If this resonates, subscribe and hit like. There's someone you know. Maybe at work. Maybe in your friend group. Maybe someone you only met once. But you remember them. Not because they were the loudest in the room. Not because they told the best stories or made the biggest impression. But because there was something about them. A quality you couldn't name. A presence that made the room feel different when they were in it. They didn't need to speak first. But when they spoke, people listened. They didn't interrupt or talk over anyone. They didn't need to prove they were smart or capable or important. They just existed. And somehow, that was enough. More than enough. People naturally gave them respect. Not because they demanded it. But because something about them commanded it effortlessly. You've probably also met the opposite. The person who tries too hard. Who speaks too much. Who needs to be the expert on everything. Who jumps into every conversation to prove they belong there. Who name drops and postures and performs authority. And the harder they try, the less respect they get. The more they push, the more people pull away. The difference between these two people isn't intelligence. Isn't accomplishment. Isn't even confidence, exactly. It's something deeper. Something harder to define but impossible to miss when you see it. The person who commands respect isn't trying to command anything. They're not performing. They're not managing how they're perceived. They're not calculating their words to sound impressive. They're just present. Fully present. And that presence creates a gravitational pull that performance can't replicate. They're comfortable with silence. When there's a pause in conversation, they don't rush to fill it. They let it breathe. They're okay with moments where nothing is happening. Where they're not contributing. Where attention isn't on them. And that comfort with not being the center makes people want to center them. They don't oversell themselves. When asked what they do or what they've accomplished, they answer simply. Without inflation. Without the need to make it sound more impressive than it is. They state facts and let others draw their own conclusions. And because they're not trying to convince anyone of their value becomes obvious. They listen more than they speak. And when they listen, they actually listen. Not planning their response. Not waiting for their turn. Not listening to find an entry point to talk about themselves. They're genuinely interested in what the other person is saying. And people feel that. Feel seen. Feel heard. And they respect someone who makes them feel that way. They're secure enough to be wrong. When they don't know something, they say so. When they make a mistake, they acknowledge it without defensiveness. When someone else has a better idea, they say that too. They don't need to be right all the time to maintain their sense of self. And that security is magnetic. Because most people are so busy protecting their ego that someone who doesn't need to is refreshing. They don't need external validation. They're not checking to see if people are impressed. Not fishing for compliments. Not monitoring how they're being received. They have an internal sense of their own value that doesn't require constant external confirmation. And because they're not desperate for approval, people approve. That's the paradox. The less you need respect, the more you get it. The person who's trying too hard is doing the opposite of all of this. They're filling every silence because silence feels like failure. They're overselling because they're not sure their actual accomplishments are enough. They're dominating conversations because they equate airtime with importance. They're defensive about being wrong because being wrong feels like losing status. They're constantly checking how they're being perceived because their sense of self is dependent on external validation. And all of that effort backfires. Because desperation repels respect. Performance highlights insecurity. Trying too hard to look powerful makes you look weak. And people can sense the difference between someone who has authority and someone who's performing authority. Because real authority doesn't need to announce itself. It's recognized, not demanded. And the recognition comes from what you don't do as much as what you do. The person who commands respect has done the internal work. They've built a foundation of self-worth that doesn't crumble when challenged. They know who they are, what they value, what they're capable of. And they don't need everyone else to know it too. That internal security creates external presence. They're not reactive. When someone challenges them or disagrees with them, they don't get defensive. They stay calm. Consider the other perspective. Respond thoughtfully instead of emotionally. And that calm in the face of conflict is powerful. Because it shows they're not threatened. They're grounded. They're comfortable being underestimated. They don't need to correct every misconception. Don't need to prove themselves in every interaction. They're okay with people not immediately recognizing their value. Because they know their value. And they trust that it will become apparent over time through their actions, not their self-promotion. They have boundaries. But they don't announce them aggressively. They simply maintain them. When something doesn't work for them, they say so calmly. When they need to say no, they say it without over-explaining or apologizing. They respect themselves enough to have limits. And people respect people who respect themselves. They're not competing. They're not trying to be better than everyone else in the room. They're not measuring themselves against others. They're on their own path. Focused on their own growth. And that lack of competition makes them less threatening. Makes people want to be around them instead of in opposition to them. They give credit freely. When someone else does good work, they acknowledge it. They're not threatened by other people's success. They don't need to diminish others to elevate themselves. And that generosity builds respect. Because small people hoard credit. Big people share it. But here's the thing that makes this difficult. You can't perform these qualities. You can't pretend to be secure. Can't fake being grounded. Can't act like you don't need validation while desperately needing it. People can tell. The desperation leaks through the performance. And the only way to genuinely have these qualities is to do the work. To build actual self-worth. To find your value internally instead of externally. To become someone who doesn't need respect to feel okay. The person who commands respect has usually been through something. They've failed publicly. Been underestimated. Had to rebuild their sense of self from scratch. And in that rebuilding, they found something solid. Something that doesn't require constant external reinforcement. They learned that their value isn't determined by whether people recognize it. And once you stop needing people to see your value, they suddenly can. Once you stop performing authority, you have it. Once you stop chasing respect, it finds you. Because the energy of desperation repels. And the energy of security attracts. This doesn't mean being passive. Doesn't mean never speaking up or advocating for yourself. The person who commands respect still has opinions. Still contributes. Still takes up space. But they do it from a place of groundedness instead of desperation. From confidence instead of insecurity. From being instead of performing. Some people walk into a room and everything shifts. Not because they're loud or because they demand attention. but because they have presence. Real, authentic presence. And that presence comes from not trying. From being secure enough to be quiet. From being grounded enough to let others shine. From being confident enough to be wrong. What if respect isn't about being the smartest or the loudest? It's not. It's about being the most present. The most authentic. The most secure in yourself. The people who command respect aren't trying to command anything. They're just fully themselves. And that's rare enough to be magnetic. Real authority doesn't announce itself. It doesn't perform. It just is. And people feel it. They respect it. Not because they were told to. But because something genuine always stands out in a world of performance. And presence always wins over pretense. You can't fake this. But you can build it. By doing the work of becoming secure. Of finding your worth internally. Of letting go of the need for constant validation. Of being okay with silence and being wrong and being underestimated. Of becoming someone who doesn't need respect to feel whole. And when you do that work, something shifts. People respond differently. Not because you're performing differently. But because you are different. And that difference is what they've been responding to all along.